Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, could China remotely disrupt U.S. ports at the touch of a button? President Biden signing an executive order to bolster U.S. infrastructure against that threat. We look into what makes them vulnerable. The European Union rolling out its first round of sanctions targeting Chinese firms. That's over their alleged involvement in Russia's war in Ukraine. How are they said to tie in? American universities shaped by funding from U.S. foes. More on why a Heritage Foundation research fellow says the money is undermining American interests. And China faces off with a deep freeze, whiteout across much of the country brought on by an unprecedented blizzard. Could American port operations grind to a screeching halt at the touch of a button from China? President Biden signing an executive order to prevent that from happening. The order aims to bolster American ports from cyber attacks, especially from China. That's because ports across the U.S. share one big vulnerability: Chinese cranes. Ports use cranes to load and unload goods, and 80% of the cranes used in American ports are made in China. By design, these Chinese cranes can be remotely programmed and controlled, raising concerns that they could be used to disrupt port operations. On top of this, some officials are worried these cranes could spy for China. They have sophisticated sensors, potentially allowing Beijing to keep an eye on what America is moving in and out of the country. The U.S. military also uses civilian ports for logistics.
If you take data that's coming off these EPMC cranes, what you then begin to be able to do is really quantify the health of the entire economy of the United States by knowing what we're truly shipping and what we're not shipping, what we're importing and not importing.
You can see from a commercial sector what's going on. You can also see from a military perspective in terms of what units are there, what size they are, what sort of gear they're getting in for training, which then strongly indicates exactly what they're expecting to be deployed.
Ports are critical for the U.S. economy. Over 30 million Americans work-related jobs, and the shipping hubs funnel over $5 trillion to the economy. But they are vulnerable to cyber attacks. One cyber attack could be enough to disrupt operations for days. In 2021, a ransomware attack forced a pipeline company in New Jersey to halt operations. Similar attacks last year forced Japan's largest port to suspend shipments for a day. Zooming out, power grids, pipelines, water systems, and other infrastructure have vulnerabilities, and Beijing has been looking to exploit them. FBI Director Christopher Wray warned last week that the U.S. is now seeing China's build-out of weapons hidden inside America's critical infrastructure. He noted that they're poised to attack whenever Beijing decides the time is right.
China's hacking program is larger than that of every other major nation combined. And that size advantage is only magnified because the PRC uses AI, built in large part on stolen innovation and stolen data, to improve its hacking operations, including to steal yet more AI tech and data.
He recently testified that about a Chinese hacking operation busted by the FBI. Chinese hackers broke into the computer networks of some major U.S. water, energy, and transportation systems, and they held onto that access for at least 5 years. The back door could have allowed them to disrupt U.S. water supplies and energy controls. U.S. officials cut off the Chinese hackers' access to those systems, but warned that the hackers are looking for new ways to get back in. Back to President Biden's executive order, it doesn't look to rip and replace the cranes, but it would go on to buy trusted cranes from countries like Japan. It would also invest $20 billion into ports over the next 5 years. The executive order would also lay out cybersecurity safety regulations for port operators. It's open to public comments until April 22nd. It's not just Chinese cranes that are raising alarm bells. A French company with close ties to Beijing has been buying terminals in U.S. ports from Los Angeles to New York. For more discussion on the new order to limit Chinese cranes, we sit down with Fleming, CEO of intelligence and security strategy firm Black Ops Partners. Fleming, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
To begin, the Biden administration is announcing a series of actions to strengthen the cybersecurity of America's ports. This is due to 80% of these giant cranes used there are made in China. What do you make of this announcement by the Biden White House?
Too late. So it should have been done years ago. You have to understand, and you have to assume everything made in China is made and controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. If it can be weaponized, it will be weaponized, and if it can't be weaponized, it will be weaponized. So I think it's a great move that should have happened 30 years ago.
On that note, this executive order doesn't seek to replace these Chinese cranes, it's just to reduce the cyber risk and secure the cranes. Now, does that mean that the U.S. takes over the control, or how do we reduce risk here?
The really focus should be on putting American cranes in and getting Chinese cranes out, because you have to understand, back what we all learned in high school, it's communism versus the free world. So why would you want communist cranes which can track absolutely everything going on, not just on the cargo, but on the people and the facial recognition and so on? You have to assume all that is being weaponized. And think about it one step further. What if there is a war with Taiwan, or a war in the South Pacific, or anywhere else in the world where China is a part of it, or where China wants to assist? There you go.
What kind of leverage does that give to the Chinese regime?
It's the Chinese and the Chinese Communist Party, they refer to espionage as 1,000 grains of sand. Think about that. And so it's any bit of espionage that you can gain from iPhones, from companies, from intellectual property, from tracking, from what you're doing, what your people are doing. Everything adds up to this espionage picture.
Now, this executive order focuses on Chinese-made cranes, but there are other ones. For instance, there's a French company called CMA-CGM that is linked to China, but it has been buying up a lot of the terminals at the ports across the U.S. Now, given that, what kind of leverage does this give to any company, regardless of which country is behind it?
There's zero leverage. So, understand the partnership that the French have with the Chinese. It's all about money. So, it's just a separate front, a different front to the same old problem. It's a CCP problem now that has a French face on it. So you have to look at all these things, follow the money, follow the strategy of your enemy, and you'll quickly see what's going on.
Casey Fleming, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
The European Union greenlighting a new round of sanctions, and for the first time, they target Chinese firms allegedly helping supply Russia's war on Ukraine. 3 companies in mainland China were reportedly on the list. They are suspected of sending critical technologies and military goods to Russia, namely electronics and semiconductors. Once approved, the blacklisted firms will be banned from doing businesses with members of the bloc. The latest action comes as the EU looks to stop Russia from using third countries and trade routes to skirt sanctions. Worth noting, Brussels had previously dropped sanctions targeting Chinese companies due to fear of angering Beijing. The new measures marks the EU's 13th package since the war in Ukraine. Besides China, it also targets several other nations like Turkey, India, and North Korea. Switching gears to the Israel-Hamas war, China railed against the U.S. Wednesday over Washington's decision to veto a UN resolution. The measure demanded an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, and the draft was proposed by Algeria, a North African nation that doesn't recognize the state of Israel. Beijing's foreign ministry spokesperson described what he called China's strong disappointment over the vote. The U.S. argued that an unconditional ceasefire would only disrupt negotiations for a hostage release. In order to pass, a Security Council resolution requires at least 9 votes in favor and no vetoes from any of the 5 permanent members: the U.S., the U.K., France, Russia, and China. The U.S. was the only country to vote against the draft. The U.K. abstained. This was the 3rd time the U.S. had vetoed a UN ceasefire proposal. As American students continue to clash over the Israel-Hamas war, concerns are rising about foreign funding and influence on college campuses. For decades, America's adversaries have sought political access to U.S. institutes of higher learning, using a variety of financial means to get it. NTD's Andrew Thomas spoke with an education expert at the Heritage Foundation to discuss how the issue threatens American interests.
U.S. adversaries buy influence at American universities through donations, research grants, foreign student tuition, and other means. A recent report by the Heritage Foundation describes how this foreign funding impacts higher education at home.
Are there any parts of American university or campus culture that foreign adversaries are trying to exploit?
So they're influencing the research that is being conducted, the coursework, and the kind of more informal student intellectual life. They are directly and indirectly influencing all of those activities.
Many of today's college students will become the next generation of leaders and innovators, and U.S. adversaries are looking for any opportunity to influence them and the institutions they attend against American interests. Green says that Iran, Qatar, China, and Russia are the main players we do know about. China in particular provides research grants in an effort to undermine American interests.
They have been caught numerous times stealing proprietary information, confidential national security information developed in our universities to bring back to China to strengthen Chinese military and corporate interests.
How does foreign funding or foreign investment affect or influence what is taught at American universities?
So it influences what is taught because, in general, anything that U.S. universities do that might be seen as contrary to the interests of large donors or sources of funding, the universities themselves will censor.
Green cites the emergence of certain Chinese educational centers at American universities as an example.
Another way is China has created a series of what are called Confucius Institutes. So these are research and instructional centers affiliated with universities that offer coursework that would be favorable towards Chinese interests.
Green argues that ideas like critical race theory and diversity, equity, and inclusion are foreign imports, rooted in Marxism and Maoism.
These are ideas that are not naturally American.
Green and the Heritage Report's co-authors argue that lawmakers need to pass legislation to ensure that American universities are transparent about the foreign funding they receive in order to protect the national interest. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
Next, we zoom in on a blizzard barreling through China. Heavy snow swept across the country Tuesday, disturbing traffic and other activities. According to China state media, nearly 200 sections of roads across 8 highways nationwide were closed. The blast continued nonstop until late Wednesday. The whiteout has spanned a number of Chinese cities.
I feel like the few days right after the snow is a little bit inconvenient just because, the road's kind of slippery and to be honest, drivers are not that considerate. And they drive super fast and just splash a lot of snow on my body.
I think it's quite good to go to work when it's snowing because, first of all, the scenery is pretty nice.
China's National Meteorological Center is forecasting sub-zero temperatures to come in many parts of the country. Coming up this Saturday on China in Focus, from slashing tour bus tires to hiring internet trolls and inflicting physical attacks. Why is the Chinese Communist Party targeting Shenyuan, a U.S.-based performance the regime doesn't want you to see?
Here we've got sponsors, American companies, trying to sponsor an American company in Shenyuan Performing Arts, and the Chinese government is coming in and trying to pressure them not to do that right here in America.
Discover what's really behind over 130 documented incidents of CCP interference against the show and learn why a peaceful meditation practice that's persecuted in China is at the heart of it all. Tune in for an exclusive interview with Levi Browdy, Executive Director of the Falun Dafa Information Center, on how Beijing manipulates narratives in America. Don't miss it, Saturday at 11 a.m. and rerun Sunday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, only on China in Focus. That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for 3 years. If you'd like to support us, consider donating. Find us at donorbox.org/China-in-focus or subscribe to our partner platform, Epic TV, where you can watch our full episodes. Here's what to look out for in our second half. More protests breaking out in China. Investigations show less pay and fewer benefits are at the heart of it, pushing Chinese people to take to the streets. Outside China, the number of Chinese students studying abroad is taking a plunge. Experts weigh in on how we should read the shift. And an AI expert joins us to discuss the rapid rise of artificial intelligence, plus the high-stakes rivalry between the U.S. and China in high-tech development. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. See you tomorrow.